People often ask me, even though, Labour's now in government, and don't get me wrong, I think a lot of the steps they're currently making, of course, in and around austerity. I'm not going to say what Rachel Reeves is probably going to announce in a couple of weeks. I'm going to like. I've been against austerity for a very long time. You saw the letter I wrote to Dan Jarvis saying, yeah, you shouldn't be following austerity. There are all different alternatives you could be following, you should be looking at, than just going down this austerity route. But for some reason, a lot of people on my side of the argument are now starting to be accused of a number of things that I think it goes into being quite frankly ridiculous. But there you go. I think these people are very quickly becoming themselves partisan hacks, but there you go. But however, why it is important to have a look constantly at other parties, what they are doing, is you get a better idea of the political landscape. And one of the big things we should always remember was that Euroscepticism and Brexit were once upon a time fringe ideas that, if they were ever brought or discussed in the mainstream, were just completely eschewed. They were completely poo-pooed. Even Nigel Farage found it at one time very hard to push on this Eurosceptic line. He took many, many, many attempts to actually finally get it right, where we saw the weaponization of anger and frustration at a government of certainly in and around that of immigration, which, well, we know wasn't good for this country. We've said it before. You can look at the figures. An immigrant from the EU was a far, far better economic prospect for all of us in the UK than someone who was a non-EU migrant, even though they themselves did also have, quite good economic prospects. So, immigration, it is good. Just look at Spain. The way that Spanish politicians have been describing immigration, talking about immigration, incredibly positively about immigration, the positive effects on immigration. The Spanish economy is growing because of immigration. And you wonder why a lot of these right-wingers don't like to talk about Spain a lot. But we have to now, I think, talk about Kemi Badenoch's speech that she made on Tuesday, because it represents what will be the next big Brexit fight. Make no mistake, that speech was the very first balloon raised in what will be the new Brexit. And if we do not start fighting back, pushing against that stuff now, we risk losing the whole argument, just as we saw on Brexit. And I worry that a lot of people are going to entirely focus their attention on Labour and what Labour are doing. And bear in mind, fine, they are in government. They are the government. If they do stuff that is wrong, yeah, I agree. They do stuff that is wrong as well. However, remember, a lot of these people who are now incredibly angry at us seem to forget that Labour has just had the biggest expansion in workers' rights in more than 2 decades. And of course, they've done the Renters' Right Reform Bill, which gets rid of no-fault evictions. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. There is no such thing as a perfect government. However, because they're all going to now literally talk non-stop about these two, those two issues, probably for the next couple of years, non-stop, they are going to be blinkered. They are going to ignore everything else that goes on to their detriment. To their detriment. And that's why, I like to give you a bit more, what's going on. Because I'm aware there are other channels. You can go watch them. You don't have to watch me. But I think this is important to talk about. So I'm going to talk about it. So before we do go getting into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link where you can buy me coffee. And thank you very much if you buy me coffee. The YouTube thank you button, and of course, there's the Pony Club down below as well. And it was Wednesday yesterday, so there is a new Pony Club video for our Patreon members, and of course, the Pony Clubbers down below as well. So, what are we talking about? Well, of course, Kemi Badenoch's big speech. What were the big takeaways? Well, first of all, her big claim that achieving net zero by 2050 is impossible without a severe drop in living standards or bankruptcy. So, first of all, those two things. Will going after net zero make a drop in living standards? How is this going to achieve a drop in living standards? Again, it's never explained. Never explained. Remember, just as in Brexit, all these EU regulations that are bad for us, not, of course, talking about things like workers' rights, fair pay, or the number of other things that just they have to just bundle in. They never got into specifics. And this is once again what we are seeing. And then bankruptcy. The only part I think Badenoch actually understood about that statement that, net zero by 2050 is impossible because it will lead to lower living standards or bankruptcy is that one thing, bankruptcy. That is the only thing she, I think, really understands herself. And remember, Badenoch is not a climate scientist, so she has nothing to back that up. She's not an expert in renewables. A lot of people who were in the renewables have actually spoken out against her on that, nor does she have any background or any experience in economics. So there is nothing that she said in that speech that will back any of that up. However, we must note this as a very significant point, because this marks the very first time we have seen a real mainstream attack on net zero. And you have to remember, at the moment in time where we are now, you have massive public approval for net zero, for being, environmentalists. We saw that not too long ago, that the most people in the UK consider themselves to be environmentalists when it comes to their ideology. So that's very, very much out of step with the rest of public opinion. But remember, this has been predicted as to what the next steps would be. There were a lot of people from academics and progressives and who predicted this would happen. The guy who runs Led by Donkeys mapped this out, a guy called Ben Shaw. It's all about you move your trenches forward. You move it forward to the next argument of what this anti-green trajectory is becoming. You always try and push the argument into the next trench. And the first trench was always deny the climate science. We absolutely deny climate science. That was it. Deny, deny, deny. Then it became, we accept, of course, climate science, but we downplay its impact. The scientists just being a bit of, alarmist. Don't worry about it. Yeah, we accept the science, but is it really having such an impact? And we've seen that. We've seen that advance literally over the past decade. But now we have got two new trenches that have formed, and this brand new one that Badenoch is now trying to advance is the new stage they want to get to. So the third stage, after, you accept the science, but you downplay its impact, it has then become, well, actually, we do admit its impact, but, all this climate action is going to be far too costly. Oh, we could do something about it, but oh, well, it's just too costly. And do people really want to bankrupt themselves just to, save the environment? Are they going to want to lower their living standards because of this? And Badenoch's speech in particular represents a brand new section of trench now being dug, that this is the final stage, that this is now the final stage, that it is, it's just too late. It's just too late, just too expensive. And that's where we are now. That you are saying to people, well, it's a little bit too late now, and it's going to be so expensive. Do you really want to do all that stuff? And we must remember that these types of radical stuff have been used before. A prime example was you saw all the anti-Ulez stuff, the low emission zones, which were sparked a massive wave of vandalism. Bear in mind, most of those vandals, even though they didn't get reported quite a lot, I think it should have been, a lot of them have been arrested. It's not, shall we say, the smartest idea to, I don't know, film your vandalism, shall we say, on that one. The next, of course, one we have seen in big culture war flashpoints very, very recently is the idea of having low traffic neighborhoods. That is becoming a massive culture war point in a lot of areas at the moment. You also saw, if you remember, we've reported about this a couple of times in the past as well. 15-minute cities. You remember we talked about the case of where there was a council and they were having a talk about these 15-minute cities, and then they were flooded with this massive protest. They were like, what's going on? Oh my word, are all these people suddenly interested in town planning? How fantastic is this? Come on, guys, we're stopping the council meeting. We're going to a larger room. And then when they went to the larger room, they were confronted by conspiracy theorists who were insistent that all of a sudden they were about to erect walls all the way around them and be monitored wherever they went. That it was just absolute insane conspiracy theories. And this is where we have to be careful, because we have seen in the past that reactionary movements were weaponized, primarily going with misinformation and anger. And those were weaponized. And that is what we should be careful now. We should be trying as hard as we can to counteract and move more effectively against all that. Because Badenoch's speech was a clear attempt to shift the public discourse, despite the fact, even in her own party, there are Green Tories who know and understand. Chris Skidmore, I keep on saying, prime example. There's a Tory who gets the net zero stuff. Disagree with him on everything else, but I'll tell you what, he gets net zero. He gets why we have to go to it. Speaks very, very good on the topic and subject as well. And now she's trying to create an illusion, that there actually is widespread opposition to environmentalism, when in reality, it's not. You look at all the people who backed Brexit, and some of them come from the biggest climate deniers, climate skeptics you can possibly think of. So we have to be vigilant and push back against this. Even though the Conservatives are not in power, don't believe this stuff is also not being pushed by Reform. It's constantly on GB News. We have to be very vigilant against this, and we have to push back against this, because if not, we end up with, as Farage himself has said, that there should be a referendum on net zero. And what on earth does that actually mean, having a referendum on net zero? So as always, thank you very much for watching. Of course, let me know what you think down below in the chat. And of course, we'll see you all next time.